Hello and welcome back to another video from Dragon Army. I thought for this one, since we are nearing the end of 2019, that we would do something extra special. For the past couple of years, I've tried to read 52 books in the year. I've been pretty consistent for the last few years. However, this year, I am reading less than 52 because I wrote a lot more for the first time. In fact, I took the whole month of November to not read anything and to only write every single day. NaNoWriMo, for those of you that actually know. But I still read well over 40, and the year's not completely over yet, so still reading a few more. However, there are good books and there are bad books that I read in the year 2019. We might get to the bad later, although let's keep this a positive channel. But for now, I want to share with you my top 5 books that I read in 2019. This is not necessarily the best books that came out in 2019. In fact, I don't know if any of these, maybe one of these actually came out this year. I am typically reading a year or two behind just because I'll never get caught up. If there's a book that I'm already in the series and it comes out in a particular year, then I might read it that year, but I'm not always looking for what's the next big best thing. Maybe I should change that. But my problem is I kind of want to wait until a lot of the reviews come out so I know that if it's worth a book giving my time and attention to in the first place. Regardless of all of that, I want to share with you my top 5 reads of 2019. And just to let you know, this list is going to be all over the place. I have somewhat of an eclectic, is a nice way to put it, taste in reading. I particularly like fantasy and sci-fi, as I've already announced that. However, I do throw in a mixture here and there. So here's top 5 of my favorite reads of 2019. Number 5 is The Hedge Knight. So we're going to go ahead and start it off weird right here. This actually isn't like fully a book in the sense of your normal, 200, 250, 1,500 page book. It's a graphic novel that was adapted from a short story by none other than George R.R. Martin. So here's one of my first confessions with this new YouTube channel, and it is that I have not read any book in A Song of Ice and Fire, the series. Also, I have not even watched one episode of Game of Thrones. This graphic novel was my first visit to Westeros. Am I even saying that correctly? Westeros? Westeros? Westeros. No. This graphic novel is a prequel to a Game of Thrones series. It takes place like 90 years, I think, before the first book in that series begins. And it is an incredibly charming story of a young squire becoming a knight and his kind of sidekick. There's a different name for it. It's not sidekick. But the world building and the fantasy medieval setting that really does it for me. The artwork is decent, but what really made this story interesting was, 1, that it was my introduction to this world at large. 2, give me horses and knights and swords and javelins and I live for that kind of stuff. And then 3, the characters. The characters here are so intriguing. From the 2 main characters, Dunk and Egg, those are their nicknames, as well as the supporting cast of characters, the villain, dark guys, as well as like the kings that you probably know the lineage of. It's just a really charming story. I'm a sucker for a good graphic novel, and so number 5 is The Hedge Knight. Number 4, we're going to continue with the weirdness here, is No Country for Old Men. This is probably my biggest surprise of 2019. I watched the movie when it first came out and enjoyed it, but I wasn't blown away like literally every single other person was. But I've got to admit, I do not have a refined movie taste. One of my favorite movies of all time is Ocean's 11, so what does that say about me? A friend picked this book up actually and asked if I would read along, so of course I did, and picked it up, did it as an ebook, and was instantly sucked into this world. Now, this world is the real world, so real, in fact, that it was taking place primarily in Texas, where I'm from, listing the cities and in part in cities that I grew up in and that I visited as a kid. In fact, it even names the city that I grew up in. I love so many things about this book. I love the minimalistic writing style, which I think I've seen in another book. Maybe it was Handmaid's Tale or something, where there's very few punctuation, quotation marks, that kind of thing. But all of the characters had a distinct way of talking, of viewing the world. I really liked the cast of characters, especially the villain. I'll have no idea how ever to pronounce his name. Chigger, maybe. But this was not a horror book at all, I don't think, just kind of like a Western tale, but it is terrifying. The villain actually scared me because I didn't know what he was going to do or what his motive was. He was just pure evil, and anytime that he came up or was around the corner, I was scared that someone was going to die, and maybe it was going to be me. Number 3 is Dark Age. It is the 5th book in the Red Rising series, and it is the 2nd book in the second half of the Red Rising series. It's kind of like there's 2 trilogies that he's working on, and the first 3 are these characters, and then 10 years later, after the events in the 3rd book, starts the 4th book, and the 5th and the 6th continues there. Same cast of characters, just advanced in time and in plot. But this series has absolutely blown me away and captured my heart. Incredible sci-fi. Pierce Brown, it's his first series, I believe, and it is absolutely stunning. You'll hear more about my love for Red Rising at a later time. Just for now, know that Red Rising is now one of my favorite series of all times. I prefer the first trilogy to the second trilogy, but they're all good. Again, Dark Age is the 5th book in the series, and it was just released this year. This was the one out of my 5 that was actually released here in 2019, and it is just a bloodbath. He uses the word bedlam a lot. Bedlam, B-E-D-L-A-M, a word that I know but use very infrequently. It's on almost every single page of this book. Whether the word is being used or not, people are dying. I love when characters die, but I hate it at the same time. But I kind of love it. Do you know what I mean? And so, of course, I'm not giving any spoilers in this, but Dark Age is aptly named. It is a dark book, but it is beautiful and raw and painful and good and delicious. And Pierce Brown really knows how to conclude his books because it really leaves you wanting more. Although I was ripped apart on the inside reading Dark Age, I'm so ready for the 6th and I believe final book in the series. It's going to be painful, but it's going to be beautiful. Number 2 is Lies, Damned Lies, and History. And this one is really not just about this book, but it's about this series. I need to make a video called Why Is No One Talking About the Chronicles of St. Mary's? It is one of the most delightful finds in the last couple of years. It's kind of sci-fi, a little bit young adult, a little bit fantasy, a little bit. It has to do with time travel. And it's the story of a delightful cast of characters that are working for St. Mary's, that are examining and studying historical events in historical contemporary times. And so every book, they're traveling back to different periods of time in history, visiting locations and events and characters from the past. They'll go to 3, 4, or 5 different locations, record events, and history always throws a curveball and things go awry. It's really just like bubblegum pop fiction, but it's delightful. I've used that word a few times. It really is delightful, enjoyable. I've not heard anybody else talk about it. Maybe I should just turn Dragon Army is now the Chronicles of St. Mary's fan club. I don't think there's enough of us. And number 1, And I Darken by Kiersten White. I don't even know where to begin here. Okay, my pitch for it is this. And I Darken is an alternate telling of the rise of the historical character and figure Vlad the Impaler, except Vlad is a young girl named Lada, and her story is much more real, much more complex than any history book has to offer. There are very few books that get me from page 1 to page final, and this is one of those books. The historical setting, the political subterfuge, the characters, the richness of the storytelling, the beautiful poetry that the author is writing, every single bit of it is absolutely astounding. And then it's set in such an unfamiliar setting in Eastern Europe. and it focuses on politics and religion, and some of that, all of that kind of sounds like it would be hard to read, and maybe it is to get into, but once you're there, it sucks you in, and it is so rich. And once it gets going, there's no slowing down. You can't stop the train. You can't stop the disasters. You can't stop the heartbreak and the heartache and all of that. It's such a good book. More people need to find out about it. And it was probably, most certainly, especially now, my #1 read for 2019, and I Darken. So those are my 5, such a weird assortment of reads in 2019. Of course, I read another 42, 43 books. Enjoyed a lot of them. I find a lot of books kind of right in the middle. If I'm going out of 5 stars, like on Goodreads, they're typically about 3. You know, that's where I land most of the time. But every once in a while, it creeps up to 4, and then I've got a few 5s. What books did you read in 2019, and which ones did you really like? Which ones did I miss? And have you read any of these 5 that I mentioned? Please let me know in the comments down below. I would love to fangirl, fanboy, fan-they with any of you. These books I absolutely loved. Hope to read again sometime soon. Would love to know if you enjoyed them as well. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. This is a brand new channel, so if you would like to find out more about what I do and see future videos, then hit the like button and join the Dragon Army by clicking subscribe. And if you care, share this video with someone that might like this content. Again, thank you for stopping by, and see you in the next video.